This clinic is sponsored by B.A.C Musical Instruments. I'm playing on a B.A.C Custom Series trombone.
And I'm playing on a Binge by B.A.C Chicago model.
Are you in the loop?
We are Joe Smith and the Spicy Pickles from Denver, Colorado, and today we're at Chimera Sound Recording Studio in Loveland. We're here to talk to you about teaching your students to play in the style of Old Testament Count Basie. Over the course of this video, we're going to discuss some of the important aspects of recreating that golden era Basie sound. These topics include roles of each instrument, equipment choices, approach to the music, time, and soloing. This video is not considered all-inclusive, but it will give you a solid foundation so that you can start recreating that Basie sound with your own ensemble.
Now let's start by defining what we mean by Old Testament Basie. This era of Basie begins in about 1935 when Benny Moten passed away. Basie left the Moten Band and took several of the key players with him to found the Barons of Rhythm, which was a 9-piece ensemble. The band was expanded to a 13-piece ensemble and renamed the Count Basie Orchestra in 1937 when the band transferred to New York City after being signed to the Decca label by John Hammond. The Old Testament period continues up through 1948 when the band was disbanded, and we tend to consider much of the Basie octet performances and recordings between 1950 and 1952 as part of the Old Testament Basie era. The reformation of the Count Basie Orchestra in 1952 is the beginning of the New Testament era.
We want to start this clinic by talking about the golden rule. In the Basie band, treating each other as people first with a family mentality was a staple of the band and is a tradition that we feel should be carried forward in all of jazz. Remind your students to respect each other and to hold each other accountable as musicians and as people.
And to add to that, being a team player is also really important. The lead roles are there to direct the section in regards to phrasing and articulation, but all members of the section are accountable to each other for playing their own parts. This accountability to each other should be emphasized to create a team mentality rather than a top-down mentality. All players should be pushing each other to be on time or early, and always prepared for rehearsals as well as performances and to perform at their very best on a consistent basis.
When playing swing music, the sound quality, weight, and size of the cymbals is really crucial. I like to use darker cymbals because they sit better in the band's sound and really help to blend with the acoustic ensemble. For example, this ride cymbal here is lightweight, 24 inches, it's about 2,300 grams, and it sounds great, especially playing behind brass and with acoustic bass and guitar. Also, we have these smaller cymbals, but they're equally dark, and they do a lot to really help support the band rather than drown them out. For example, this china has rivets in it that kind of gives it that blankety feeling for when we're trying to play behind a shout chorus or a louder soloist. The other great thing about this beautiful Northeast drum set are these calfskin heads from Earth Tone that really have the warmth and depth of an old school swing drum kit. Let me demonstrate kind of that sound for you. Another thing I love to use is this app called Live BPM that is made for Apple and Android, and it's great for tracking the tempo of the ensemble while the band is playing. It's great for conductors, good for the rhythm section to get that natural swing feeling, but also really keeping the tempo consistent. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about playing time in the swing style. A key component of playing swing drums is playing 4 to the bar with a fluffy beater. This really gives the music an insistent, danceable quality that locks in nicely with the bass to create a driving momentum. I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of this with different volume of the hi-hat and add some little flares, and we'll talk about those. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So they call this feathering the bass drum. It's insistent, it's 4 to the bar, but you can also drop bombs and give it this kind of nice dance quality to accompany the soloist. And you can open up the hi-hats a little bit too. Unlike more modern styles of jazz, which are really based around the ride cymbal keeping the time, in swing music we keep the time primarily on the hi-hats. We especially want to aim for having a kind of wash, this kind of open sound that really kind of fills up the entire beat. An important thing to emphasize to your students would be to learn how to control the hi-hats, to play them at a closed volume, a partly closed, and an open volume, so we get this full dynamic range with the hi-hat. The other cymbals on the kit are used primarily in other sections of the arrangement, such as the shout chorus, which is kind of the peak of the arrangement often. In this example, which will be Count Basie's Dickie's Dream, I will be going from the hi-hat during the piano solo to the ride cymbal and the crashes for the shout chorus. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3. Generally, unless the music is calling for it, like in early R&B or on a really intense shout chorus, in swing music we really want to push forward on all 4 quarter notes rather than hitting on a backbeat. So it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to like this. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So one of the first considerations of playing this style of music nowadays, as compared to back in the day, is that we've used very different setups, different strings, different amplification, different pickups than were available back at the time. So to emulate the style of the bass players back in the 1930s, they used to play on gut strings, which for a number of reasons, a lot of bass players love them. I would not recommend them for beginners. But the gut strings they used back in the day had a much quicker decay than these steel strings that we use today. So I'll give an example playing with the longer sustain that my steel strings naturally have. And if we want to emulate the sound of the bass players on the recordings from back in the day, we can intentionally cut our notes shorter. That might be a little too short, so maybe find a happy medium. Yep. And one of the other big differences is back then, with no amplification, no pickups for the acoustic bass, they were lucky to have a microphone occasionally. They really had their instruments set up to be as loud as possible, but even then, they generally weren't loud enough. So on most of these recordings from the 1930s, the bass player basically has one volume, and it's as loud as they can play all the time just to try to get heard. With steel strings and pickups and amplification, we don't have to do that all the time. So I would encourage young bass players to experiment with playing at different volumes. Just like you did with note length, and get comfortable with the entire range of both of those aspects that we have, so you can make real-time decisions to best serve the ensemble at that moment. The next thing we're going to talk about is the concept of beat placement. And what beat placement is, if you can imagine practicing with a metronome, it's whether, as the bass player, we play our quarter notes directly with the metronome, a little bit ahead of the metronome, or, less common, a little bit behind the metronome. This is a pretty advanced concept, and many students won't be ready for this, so keep that in mind. In the different styles of music have different rules, kind of unspoken, but for this era of big band jazz, generally the drummer is in the middle of the beat. They're the metronome. And then both the bass and the guitar play slightly ahead of the drums. And that creates a really nice driving tension that, you put a horn section on top of that, and it really swings. So to give an example of that, I'm going to count our drummer off, and we're going to do an F blues. And I am going to start off placing my beats directly in the middle with him. I'll let him play a couple bars first. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's his beat, and I'll play right with it. 1, 2, 3. All right, and now we'll do the same thing. I'll count them off, but this time I'll do the 1930s, kind of Walter Page style, and place my notes just a hair ahead of where the drummer is, and see if you can feel the tension, feel that drive that I'm creating by doing that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the example of placing your quarter notes a little bit ahead of the beat, which is the style we want for 1930s big band jazz. And for note choice for playing this style of music in our walking lines and bass lines, we have a couple different things to consider. Compared to other styles of jazz, this kind of music you want to be much more root-oriented and fifth-oriented. There's the root, there's the fifth. And for this style of music, not as common as in other styles of music, but every now and then we see what's called a two feel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It sounds like a country bass line, but it's also standard in a whole lot of styles of vintage jazz. And generally, that's not what we want in 1930s big band music, but it still does happen sometimes. We want to stick to walking bass, which is 4 notes to the bar. Something really important stylistically for this kind of music, in my opinion, is kind of a double up technique where you're doing more along the lines of something like this. And to really play the style, you can start off with that sort of concept and then add walking lines to lead to the next chord, so kind of like as fills. We've spent some time talking about sustain, how long we want our notes. We've talked about volume considerations, and we've also talked about different approaches to walking lines, whether we're playing walking bass or doing a double up technique. You can hear all of these in our recording of Dickey's Dream.
Playing guitar in the style of Old Testament Count Basie music is generally described with 4 chords to the measure. It's a way to bring energy and pulse from the rhythm section as well as create a counter melody to the bass. The setup for the guitar makes a huge difference. I've got a beautiful hollow body guitar here, and this is the preferred choice for playing this style of music. You can also play on a semi-hollow, or if your student has a solid body rock guitar, that can be made to work if you just roll off the tone knob to about 1 to 3 and set the pickup to the neck position. The way that the guitar is held can make a big difference in the sound. For instance, if you have a hollow body or semi-hollow guitar and you hold it close to your chest like this, it can cut off a lot of the sound. For instance, as opposed to if I play with an angle, opens up the tone a lot. The rhythmic element in Freddie Green style comping is the most important. I like to try to create a nice light driving feeling when I'm playing with the band. To achieve this, I'll try to feel the whole beat in my arm. At slower tempos, I'm using my whole forearm to try to get the sound, and at faster tempos, I need to use my wrist, otherwise I'll probably die. To try to get this light driving feeling, you want to play all of the beats even, but often playing 1 and 3 long, 2 and 4 short. Freddie would sometimes change depending on the section if he wanted to give the soloist a different kind of space, a different kind of feeling, but he would keep the right hand even the whole time. To demonstrate, another important part of playing in the style of Freddie Green is finding the right voicings. Oftentimes, in high school or college charts, you'll just have too many chords. Maybe there's an extension on every beat, there's a different chord on every beat of the measure, and you just don't need to worry about all of that. Freddie would often play just 1 to 3 notes, mostly focusing on the guide tones or the 3rd and 7th on the D and G strings. Even though at its core the Freddie Green style of comping is just 4 chords to a measure, you can often embellish it. One way to start is rhythmic embellishment. You can add upstrokes with your right hand on off beats, or you can accent different beats in the measure, creating hemiolas or polyrhythms over the rhythm section. Another way you can embellish this style is adding passing chords. An easy way to do that is by simply playing the same voicing a half step above or below your destination voicing. To demonstrate, I'm going to play an F blues with the rhythm section. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
So as is the case with studying any kind of music, it's really important that we come from a place of understanding the recordings that have been left for us in whatever particular style we are trying to learn to play. So in the case of swing music, it is very important that from the piano we understand what those pianists such as Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Earl Father Hines, what those pianists do and some of the techniques they use so that we can implement them into our own playing. So one of the notable characteristics of Count Basie's style at the piano is discretion and taste. It always sounds like Basie really is very much in tune with what his band is playing at all times, and he's really sitting in everything he plays sits right in the spaces that the band leaves. So from the pianist in a swing band, this is really
a very similar role that we can adapt, is filling in the gaps and really trying to get out of the way of the horn section. So there's one particular voicing that Basie got a lot of mileage out of, and that's the iconic ending that he used to use a lot. Basie and many other pianists would use these wider spread out voicings in a lot of different contexts, not just at the end of tunes, of course. So what's really useful about this voicing is that we get a lot of different sounds from the same shape. So we get the 1 chord on a B flat 7, we've got the 6th, the 3rd, and the root. And then if we move the middle note up 1 half step, we get G, E flat, and B flat, which could work over the 4 chord or the 2 chord. So we have a couple of different things there. And then if we moved it up 1 more half step, we get this really great diminished sound, G, E, and B flat. And that can work in a couple different contexts as well. That could be over E diminished between the 4 and 5 chord on a blues. This could be just used in a blues context, you know, over the 1 chord. And then right below the 3rd, we have this flat 3rd, which can work on the 5 chord. Now I'll demonstrate that with the rhythm section and how we can use that voicing in a couple different contexts. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Getting our students to articulate in the correct way is the key to getting the right feel within the horn section. Now, before we dive into articulation, I'd like to just go over some basic tongue position for the woodwinds. For saxophonists, you're going to want to have your tongue very high in the back. If you have your students say the letter E and hold that out, they should feel the back of the tongue rise up and kind of be touching their top back molars. Now, this has many different benefits, but as far as articulation goes, it kind of anchors the back of the tongue and leaves the tip of the tongue free to do all of the work. You want to remind your students that they need to connect the tip of their tongue to the tip of the mouthpiece. If you see any sort of bullfrogging motions from the throat, like so, that's a pretty dead giveaway that they are using too much tongue and they need to focus their attention in to the very tip of the tongue. A significant bulk of the material saxophonists are going to be playing in a big band style are strings of 8th notes. Maybe something like this, honeysuckle rose. Now, these 8th note lines should always be played in a smooth legato style. The students want to be thinking of a D articulation as opposed to a T articulation, which has a very sharp percussive front to the note. And the key to this smooth legato style is that they keep their air moving when they are articulating. If I slow down the articulation process to super slow-mo speeds and left my tongue on the reed, you'll still be able to hear air moving. Have your students tried this? From there, I would have them take just one pitch and play repeated quarter notes with it, aiming for consistency and to keep their air moving with each new articulation. If the students are ready to move on, they can take this concept and apply it to scales. Now let's take an F major scale, for example. We're going to start articulating on the second note and slurring into the following note. So that would sound something like this. So that pattern again is tongue, slur, starting on the second note. Now this is the basic and most introductory way of articulating in a swing style. If the students are able to take these concepts and apply them to the music they are working on, it's going to give the music that forward momentum and the melodic, song-like quality that I associate with the Count Basie Orchestra.
As we all know, articulation in the big band is one of the most difficult things for us as educators to teach with consistent results. What we should do is we should constantly be emphasizing our students to overdo their articulations. It means clean, quick, and precise cutoffs and attacks on every note. As this specifically relates to the early Count Basie style, it's absolutely imperative that we hone in these very concepts as we do with our other big band charts. For example, as we articulate notes in the Count Basie style that don't have any sort of marcato or staccato marking, we want to articulate these notes with a hard D tongue, and we want to release with the tongue as well. So it's a tongue at the front and it's a tongue stop at the end. It's also really important that whenever we do have marcatos and staccatos, we also take the initiative to make sure that there is a distinct difference between those two, particularly if we have several marcatos or several staccatos lined up in quarter notes in a row. For example, if I wanted to play a marcato and I was teaching this to my school band program, I would use dot, D-A-H-T. If I was using staccatos, I would teach it as dit, D-I-T. The way that this comes out on the instrument is the marcatos are going to have a much fatter but much more precise and clean sound, whereas the staccatos are going to have a much more closed off sort of sound. Allow me to now demonstrate. This would be a marcato articulation. And the staccato articulation. With early ensembles, you may get some pitch fluctuation. Additionally, you might get some other nuances that are easily fleshed out with consistent practice and including this in your warm-ups. When we're practicing these items, it's absolutely imperative that we remind our students to be practicing with a metronome. In all aspects of music, the metronome is one of the most important items that we can give our students as a practicing tool. When the students are practicing with their metronome, remind them that the metronome should groove along with them in whatever phrase or excerpt they may be practicing from the Count Basie library. When the students are practicing, they should feel like the metronome is grooving along with them and never against them. If it feels like it's working against them, the student should revisit and make sure that they're counting all of their rhythms appropriately. In other words, what one of my teachers once told me is at all times when we're practicing with a metronome, all of our different articulations should create a good swing feel, and we will reach terminal swing. One of the things that I love most about the early Count Basie band is the blues-based soloing. All of the great musicians that came out of the band have these deep roots in the blues in all of their solos. A lot of this comes from inspiration they gathered from great vocalists such as Jimmy Rushing, who did a lot of work with the Count Basie band at the time. Making a melody is one of the most important aspects of playing in this style of music, a melody that you can sing back or whistle to yourself as you walk down the street. Teaching our students to use control, perhaps maybe isolation techniques in building up for a great solo, is an idea you might want to use in your ensemble. And lastly, the repeated riffs idea is always synonymous with Count Basie Orchestra. And a lot of these riffs that we hear in some of the great arrangements, such as 1 O'Clock Jump, actually came from solos at one point in time. So let the students use riffs that they know or have learned, or maybe a riff that they've come up on their own, as an idea in a sort of jumping board for them to bounce off into their own improvised ideas. It's going to really hone in that style, and it shows that the students have been listening, as they should be, to the early Count Basie recordings in addition to practicing them at home and in the classroom.
Throughout Count Basie's career, his band had a reputation for playing their dynamics to the extreme. This was common in the 1930s and 1940s when most dance halls and performance venues had very limited access to a microphone to be used by an announcer or a vocalist. This made it so that the rest of the band was playing acoustically and that they had to play their dynamics to an extreme so that it could communicate all the way from the stage to the very back of the hall. This is how they communicated the intent of the arrangement. The key to playing with the full range of dynamics is consistent directional air. To help visualize the airstream, I ask my students to picture a ball in front of them in the air, and then I ask them to blow their air across the very top of the ball to create a forward spin. Once I am able to get them to get that forward spin on the ball, I ask them then to direct their air to the bottom of the ball so that we can create a backward spin with the ball. Once the student is able to do both of these individually, to the top and then to the bottom of the ball, then I ask them in the middle to change their direction so that they will go top to the bottom to the top. So and so on. This helps us to create a very directional airflow that is consistently moving forward and gives our students a visualization so that they can make this a habit. With any style of music, the foundation of a solid section sound comes from having all parts within the section heard. You will need to spend time in sectionals finding where the correct balance is from part to part. You'll find possibly that your lower parts are going to have to play out even more than the dynamic that is indicated in order to match the volume of your upper parts. This is a great time to talk to your students about frequency and how higher frequencies are able to better move forward and move through the sound of an ensemble to be heard, while lower frequencies will have to work more because there is more sound for them to move through to be heard by the audience. Just like the rhythm section in the Count Basie Orchestra, the horns place a great emphasis on time. There's a few things that we do to really kind of push our phrasing forward and to create that relentless driving forward swing sound that the Count Basie Orchestra was known for. One of these things is whenever we have longer notes, a half note or a whole note for instance, we will be pushing directionally with our air through that note and even adding just a touch of a crescendo so that we are moving all the way to the release of that note. The release of that note is the end of the phrase, and that is the end of the sentence that we are saying. In the horn section, we have a few things that we need to take into consideration. We are always pushing to the very end of the phrase. We like to ask that our lead players are writing in phrase markings and to dictate where the release is on certain notes. It's not uncommon for us to ask our lead players to write in a -1 to know that the release of the note is on the downbeat of the next measure. This allows us to have uniformity in our section and also continues to place a strong emphasis on time. Also within phrasing, we'd like to address inflections. There's always these little tricks that make arrangements sound really fantastic, but unless they're done uniformly, can make a phrase sound very sloppy. A fantastic example of this is falls in your brass section. We always want to emphasize that a fall should default to being half valve and it needs to always be short unless it is written in the part that it is a long fall. Doing this will allow the section to have a uniform fall sound that is short and gets out of the way so that the arrangement can continue forward. Just like with the longer half notes and whole notes, in our falls we want to make sure that we still continue to have directional air all the way to the very release of the note. This will ensure that the music propels itself forward and really gives us that driving swing sound. And now that you've had a chance to really hear all of this material and how we approach teaching the Count Basie style of music to students, we'd love to show you some examples of the band performing them so that you can hear how we are putting all of this into play.